Chapter 1, The Son of the Cave and the Wind. Feel the damp scent of moss and wet earth beneath your bare feet. Hear the first sound of the reed flute, not a melody, but a sigh from the world itself. See, among the trees of Arcadia, a shadow that moves with light steps, but whose hooves make the stones tremble. This is Pan. In the wild mountains of the heart of ancient Greece, where the Olympian gods seem as distant as stars, Pan does not reign, he exists. He was not molded for glory or order. He was born as nature itself, instinctive, contradictory, alive. Son of Hermes and a nymph, Dryope or, in other versions, Penelope, he came into the world with horns, a thick beard, and legs ending in hooves. Upon seeing him, his mother cried out not out of malice, but out of fear. Pan was not like the others. He did not aspire to thrones or elegant speeches, he longed to run, to dance, to feel the wind on his body as he chased nymphs through the streams. Hermes, however, was not ashamed of his son. He took him to Olympus not to be admired, but to be witnessed. The gods laughed, even Ares mocked his horns, but Dionysus, lord of ecstasy, recognized in him the raw truth of the body, prior to reason and shame. Faced with this, Zeus decreed, let this half-man, half-goat be the guardian of what cannot be tamed, of the uncultivated forests, of the flocks that still run free, of the unconfessed desires. Thus, Pan returned to Arcadia not as an exile, but as king of the undomesticated. His flute, made from the reeds that were once syrinx, the nymph who transformed herself to escape him, does not play notes, but pulses, desires, the ancestral memory of the body in communion with the earth. But there is a price to pay for living like Pan, being seen as grotesque, feared for his mere presence, called a monster by those who do not understand instinct. Even so, shepherds leave honey in his caves, nymphs dance with him at midnight, and armies, hearing his cry, fall to their knees, not out of cowardice, but out of recognition. The panic he provokes is not weakness, but the instant the soul sees the sacred chaos behind the illusion of order. And now, in the hills of Arcadia, a young shepherd named Lycos, skeptical, laughing at the stories, leads his flock to the most remote valley, the one where they say Pan appears when someone forgets him. As he crosses the crossroads of white stones, everything falls silent. The sheep stop. The wind ceases. And, between two twisted olive trees, something breathes. Chapter 2, The Shepherd Who Laughed at the Silence. Feel the cold sweat on Lycos's neck, even under the midday sun. Hear the absolute silence, no bird, no cricket, not even the tinkling of sheep bells. See his eyes widen as, among the olive trees, a pair of curved horns moves in the shadows. Lycos, the skeptical young man who mocked the old shepherds for leaving honey in the caves, had always called Pan a tale to explain the wind. But before that presence, a human torso covered in hair, goat legs, yellowish eyes with slit pupils, his heart beats like a war drum. Pan speaks in a hoarse, almost amused voice, you laugh at the gods. Lycos replies bravado, but the god doesn't play the flute, he only emits a guttural rumble that makes the sheep run and the shepherd's body recognize something ancestral. Before the city, there was the forest, before the word, the cry, before reason, instinct. Pan sits beside him like an old acquaintance and dismantles Lycos's illusion with fierce clarity. He didn't come merely to graze, but because his dreams were filled with unknown rivers and a music he didn't know how to play. The shepherd shudders, it's true. Sent to the city to learn from the philosophers, he had returned because his soul refused the dry logic and forced silence of the straight streets. When he asks why Pan frightens people, he hears a reply that cuts deep, I don't frighten. I reveal. Panic, the god explains, is not fear of him, but of what humans have hidden from themselves, desires, furies, unbridled joys. The mirror shatters, and the truth appears. Then, Pan extends his flute. Lycos blows, producing a harsh sound, but enough to make the leaves tremble and a deer emerge fearlessly. Music isn't in the fingers. It's in the blood. But the moment is interrupted by the metallic sound of axes and nails. They are opening a road. And with it, they will bring order, and forget that the world breathes, laments Pan. Before disappearing in an impossible leap among the rocks, he leaves one last warning, if one day you hear the silence return, don't run from it. Call me. Lycos keeps the flute under his tunic, knowing that his life has changed forever. What he doesn't yet know is that, soon, he will witness the cry that stopped an army, and the moment when Pan, forgotten for centuries, will demand that the world pronounce his name again. Chapter 3, The Cry That Stopped an Empire. Smell the dust and sweat of thousands of marching men, leather sandals, iron spears, the hot breath of war horses. Hear the sudden silence on the field of Marathon, where the wind stops as if holding its breath. See the messenger Phidippides, panting, standing at the crossroads between fear and destiny. It is 490 BC, and Greece hangs over the abyss. The Persians advance like a black tide, and Phidippides, with bleeding feet and burning eyes, runs between cities carrying fragile hope. But, on a dark night near the Parthenon, something stops him, not an enemy, but an ancient presence. From the shadows emerges Pan, curved horns, goat legs, eyes blazing like embers. His question echoes like a judgment, "Why don't you sacrifice me anymore?" Phidippides falls to his knees. He doesn't recognize the god's name, but his body remembers. That voice is the voice of the earth, of instinct, of the sacred fear that the city walls tried to bury. Then, without warning, Pan screams. It's not a human sound, but the howl of the mountain, the roar of the avalanche, the primordial cry of the living world. Miles ahead, at Marathon, the Persian army freezes. Horses rear, archers drop their bows, commanders lose control, not through strategy, but through sacred panic, through a glimpse of the chaos behind the illusion of order. In that instant of collective breakdown, the Greeks, outnumbered, advance and win. Phidippides runs back to Athens not only with news of the victory, but with an urgent mission: tell the priests, Pan is alive. And he demands his place back. Altars are erected in caves, offerings of honey and milk return to crossroads, and statues of the god with flutes in hand begin to watch over the paths, not as idols, but as reminders. Lycos, now a young adult, hears the story and understands. The fear he felt upon encountering Pan was not weakness, but awakening. Like many, he begins to play the flute, not to imitate the god, but to keep alive the memory of the wild instinct within him. But centuries pass. The temples fall. Reason takes the place of mystery. In Rome, much later, a sailor will cry out from the sea, "The great god Pan is dead." And Plutarch will record the lament. But Pan does not die. He merely withdraws, like the wind that disappears but never ceases to exist. Because the world, sooner or later, always needs to hear his cry again. Chapter 4, The Love That Became a Reed. Feel the coolness of the stream running over smooth stones, smelling of wild mint and damp mud. Hear the distant sound of feminine laughter, light, like leaves in the wind, and, behind it, the hurried footsteps of hooves on moss. See the nymph Syrinx running among the reeds, her eyes full of fear, and something more, choice. She is the daughter of the river-laden, slender body, hair like moonbeams, feet that barely touch the ground. Her chastity is not imposed, but essence. She prefers the solitude of the running water to the promise of any embrace. Pan, seeing her at dusk in Arcadia, does not understand her "no" as a limit, but as a challenge of desire. "Wait! I only want to dance with you," he cries, urgently and tenderly. But Syrinx flees, not out of hatred, but out of wisdom. She knows Pan's nature. He does not want possession, but fusion. And whoever merges with it loses their form, becomes music, wind, echo. Upon reaching the riverbank, with Pan already nearby, breathless and glowing with an existential hunger, the desire to be accepted without judgment, to touch what he never could, Syrinx raises his arms and cries out to Mother Earth, "Transform me, so that I am not taken, nor lose myself." The earth responds. His feet become roots, his arms, green stems, his body, a bundle of reeds swaying in the wind. Pan touches only dry leaves. Silence. No cries, no tears, only the wind whispering among the reeds, "You arrived too late." But he does not rebel. He kneels, cuts 7 reeds of different sizes, ties them together with beeswax, and blows. The world's first flute is born, the syrinx, an instrument of desire and mourning, ecstasy and absence, in homage to the nymph who refused to be possessed in order to become eternal. From that day forward, every time Pan plays, Syrinx responds, not with her body, but with the wind that passes through the reeds. Shepherds know, those who love too much can sometimes only love through loss. The deeper lesson, however, is another. Syrinx did not flee out of fear of desire, but because two wild beings cannot merge without one disappearing. In creating the flute, Pan did not imprison her, he freed her in music. Years later, Lycos will find the same instrument under an olive tree. Playing it, he will feel not only pain, but recognition. In loss, he found himself. But the world continues to forget. And Pan, faced with the growing silence, will have to decide, continue playing for the few, or shout again, even if no one else knows how to hear. Chapter 5, The Last Shepherd of Arcadia. Smell the smoke of old firewood and the even more ancient scent, that of earth scorched by the summer sun. Hear the sound of a solitary flute, played without a master, as if the wind had learned the music on its own. See Lycos, now a grown man, sparse beard, calloused hands, sitting at the entrance of a grotto where, they say, Pan slept for 1,000 winters. The world has changed. Roman roads cut through Arcadia like scars, temples have become ruins where children play, Young shepherds speak of laws, not spirits, and no one leaves honey at crossroads anymore. But Lycos resists. Every new moon, he walks to the grotto with milk, wild grape wine, and the reed flute he found years before, the one made from the syrinx itself. He doesn't play expecting a response. He plays because playing is remembering. And tonight, as the Orphic to Pan ends, the wind falls silent, and a hoarse voice emerges from the darkness. Is there still anyone who calls me by name? Pan appears not as a glorious god, but as a weary presence, broken horns, graying fur, eyes marked not by rejection, but by the indifference of time. Men do not hate me, worse, they have forgotten that I exist, he says, sitting beside Lycos. They speak of gods who judge, reward, punish, but they have forgotten the God who simply exists, like the mountain, like the wolf, like instinct. Lycos offers wine, Pan drinks in silence, and they speak of the nature of chaos, not as an enemy, but as the cradle of all order, poem, and true love. Beneath the stars, which shine without temples or names, Pan prophesies that one day they will hear that he is dead. But it will not be true. They will only be burying me alive, as they bury everything they cannot tame. Lycos asks what he should do. Keep playing. Even if no one dances. Even if no one cries. Because one day, someone will hear, and remember that they have hooves under their feet. That night, Pan doesn't play, he only listens. At dawn, he disappears not with a leap, but with a sigh, like mist in the rising sun. Lycos returns to his flock, but he is no longer just a shepherd, he has become the guardian of a memory that endures. However, time is running out. Rome expands. Roads multiply. And soon a new god will come, not with a flute, but with a cross, not with wild song, but with the promise of a distant heaven, forgotten by the earth. In this new world, Pan will be called a demon, because nothing frightens civilization more than the savage who refuses to die. Chapter 6, The Name That Became a Demon. Smell the incense burning in marble temples, dense, sweet, suffocating. Hear the sound of hammers smashing ancient statues, while voices chant hymns in languages that no longer speak to the rivers. See, in the streets of transformed Athens, an old shepherd being pushed by a Roman soldier. Out, goat worshipper. Your god is dead. Pan is not dead, but he is being eradicated. Centuries after Marathon, the Roman Empire expands not only with legions, but with a new worldview, rigorous order, soul separated from the body, desire as sin. Pan, half man, half goat, lord of instinct and friend of untamed nature, becomes the perfect symbol of what must be eradicated. His flute is called the devil's instrument, his horns, emblems of lust, his laughter, a sign of pagan madness. In the streets, children mock the shepherds of demons. In the new cults, priests preach a single, distant god who demands chastity and silent obedience. But in the mountains where Rome has not yet arrived, Lycos, now a grandfather, with tired eyes but a firm voice, resists. Seated with his grandchildren, he weaves reeds and whispers forgotten truths. Pan is not a demon. A demon is he who fears his own body. A demon is he who cuts down trees and calls it progress. His grandchildren, divided between Roman games and whispers of the forest, listen with fascination. Damon, the youngest, asks if he will see horns or angels if Pan appears to him. You will see what your heart still allows you to see, Lycos replies. But danger approaches. A converted Roman tribune orders the destruction of all pagan altars, including the caves of Arcadia. On the eve of his death, Lycos makes his last pilgrimage. He leaves honey, wine, and Syrinx's flute. If you are still there, know that you have not been forgotten. The wind responds with an almost inaudible sound, the stifled lament of a god who refuses to disappear. The following morning, the soldiers destroy the altar. They laugh at the carved horns, trample the offerings. Only one hesitates, Gaius, a young legionary whose grandmother still left milk at crossroads. He hides his flute under his tunic. At night, in the camp, he blows. The sound is weak, but the stars, for a moment, shine brighter. Pan does not appear, but something within Gaius remembers. This is how the god survives, not in temples, but in hidden gestures, in nocturnal sighs, in hearts that, even under crosses, still feel the call of the forest. Soon, Plutarch will hear a sailor shout from the sea that the great god Pan is dead, and the world will believe it. But gods do not die when they are forgotten. They die when no one misses them anymore. And in Gaius' veins, in Damon's hands, in Lycos' silence, someone still feels. Chapter 7, The Cry No One Will Hear. Feel the salt of the Aegean Sea on your face, mingled with the smell of wet wood and the stench of human fear. Hear the wind howling between the masts of the merchant ship sailing off the island of Paxos. See Captain Tomo, huddled on deck, while a sailor kneels, screaming as if he had witnessed the end of the world. It is the year 20 AD. The Roman Empire dominates the land, the temples of Zeus are empty. the oracles have fallen silent. And, tonight, a voice resounds from the very heart of darkness, O Tamo. When you reach Patras, announce that the great god Pan is dead. No one sees anything, but everyone feels it, and terror paralyzes them. The news spreads like wildfire, Pan is dead. Decades later, Plutarch will record the episode as the farewell of the ancient gods. But the truth is more subtle, Pan is not dead. He was declared dead, because a god only dies when no one believes he can hear anymore. In Arcadia, Lycus, now old and blind, hears the news with a bitter smile, of course he's dead. They killed him with silence. His grandchildren no longer play the flute, Damon sells cheese in Corinth, Gaius, the former legionary, grew old in Rome, baptized in the name of a god without horns, without hooves, without wild laughter. And yet, in the caves where the wind still whispers through the reeds, something endures. Pan has not disappeared, he has retreated deeper, not from the earth, but from the collective consciousness. He has become an archetype, a shadow, the savage hidden within every man who pretends to be only reason. In dreams, he persists, a poet in Athens writes verses that sound like a flute, a healer in Ephesus whispers, Pan, without knowing why, a woman in Alexandria dances under the moon, feeling her feet light, almost like hooves, and laughs, free. No one leaves offerings anymore, no one asks the crossroads which path serves their nature. But Pan knows, his time as a visible god is over. His time as inner truth has only just begun. The panic hasn't disappeared, it has transformed. Today, it appears as causeless anxiety, as repressed desire, as the silent cry of those who live among concrete and have forgotten the smell of wet earth. Centuries later, romantic poets like Shelley and Keats will resurrect him in verse, eco-artists will invoke him in protests, psychoanalysts will name him as instinct. But Pan never needed names. He only needs presence. And that night at sea, when Themis heard the cry, it wasn't the death of a god that echoed, it was his last visible breath, before becoming what he always was, nature itself, waiting to be remembered. The world will continue to forget, until one day, someone stops in the middle of the city, listens to the silence between the cars and, without knowing why, sighs like a goat on a mountain. Chapter 8, The God Who Dances in the Ruins. Smell the damp ink on thick paper, mingled with the dust of forgotten libraries. Hear the squeak of a goose quill on parchment as a young English poet writes, by candlelight, verses that tremble like leaves in the wind. See, in the margins of his manuscript, a hastily sketched drawing, horns, a flute, hairy legs, Pan reborn in the imagination of a world that thought it had buried him. It is the 19th century. Factories smoke, cities grow like stone fungi, and reason proclaims itself sovereign. But, in the bowels of modern man, something throbs. John Keats, who never set foot in Greece nor saw Arcadia, feels, when reading the classics, an inexplicable longing, that of the wild. In Endymion, he writes, the great god Pan still lives, in the streams, in the woods, in the sighs of the wind. Shelley calls him, the spirit of untamed nature, Blake, of the divine irrational. Nietzsche, decades later, would invoke its spirit in the Dionysian, the creative chaos that precedes all order. But Pan does not feed on verses, he feeds on dancing bodies, on bare feet, on desires that ask no permission. And, in secret, he resurfaces. In England, young romantics walk barefoot through the forests, leaving flowers in hollow trunks. In Germany, composers imitate the sound of the reed flute in symphonies. In America, Thoreau flees to the shores of silent lakes in search of what he calls essential life, but which, deep down, he knows to be Pan. Even an archaeologist in Delphi, upon finding a small statuette of the god under rubble, understands, Pan does not want to be studied. He wants to be felt. Therefore, he leaves the figure back in the earth, with a strand of honey beside it, an ancient, silent, living gesture. However, the modern world does something worse than forget, it domesticates. Pan is transformed into a symbol of relaxation, decorative nature, light spirituality. His face is sold on t-shirts, his image is placed in self-help books, his name is reduced to a convenient icon of desire, embedded in apps and hashtags. But the real Pan laughs, a horse laugh, sounding like hooves running at midnight. Because he knows, as long as there is a single human being who, hearing the wind among the reeds, feels a hunger for something nameless, he will be alive. In the ruins of the ancient world, in the cracks of concrete, in the pauses between notifications, Pan waits, not to be worshipped, but to be remembered as the part of us that never accepted being civilized. And soon, when rivers dry up, forests burn, and men are lost in machines that do not breathe, someone, somewhere, will call his name. And Pan will answer, not with a cry, but with a single breath of a flute, that will shake the foundations of the false order. Chapter 9, The Call in the Intertwining of Concrete. Smell the scent of hot asphalt mixed with the unexpected perfume of wild jasmine sprouting from a crack in the sidewalk. Hear, behind the roar of the cars, the almost imperceptible sound of a flute, not recorded, not digital, but real, as if someone were blowing between the buildings. See Elisa, a young woman standing at a Lisbon intersection, her eyes closed, oblivious to the traffic light that changes color repeatedly. She doesn't know Pan's name, but she feels his presence like an ancestral echo. Raised among screens, exams, and the silent pressure of being productive, Elisa works in a glass office with recycled air and plastic plants. But, in the early mornings, she dreams of unknown rivers, dances without music, and legs that run with hooves. In a forgotten park between skyscrapers, an old man with bare feet hands her a dry reed and says, "Blow when the world is silent." That night, in her apartment, she cries and blows, and, though the sound is faint, the city lights seem to respond. Pan has not returned as a god, but as a necessity. The world has entered a new Arcadia, made of ecological crisis, digital loneliness, and an emptied soul. Pan doesn't demand temples, he demands attention. And, silently, it is being reclaimed. In Berlin, artists plant trees in industrial ruins and play flutes at sunset. In Brazil, young indigenous people sing in ancestral languages, invoking forest spirits, unknowingly echoing Pan's cry. In the US, scientists studying the intelligence of forests speak of mycelial networks, but in dreams, they hear a flute. Pan smiles, not because he is worshipped, but because, finally, he is being heard. However, there is danger. Many call upon him seeking solace, not transformation. They want nature domesticated, desire controlled, chaos resolved with app-guided meditation. But Pan is not therapy. He is rupture. And if the world continues pretending it can save nature without surrendering to it, he will scream again, not to stop armies, but to awaken sleeping souls. Elisa now visits the park every new moon. She plays her rustic flute. No one dances, no one cries, but the birds stop singing and listen. She knows, she's not crazy. She's coming home. Because Pan never died, he only waited for the world to miss what he didn't even know he had lost. And, in the cracks in the concrete, in the pauses between notifications, in the silence after the last email, he is already playing. But time is running out. The final test is approaching. When the planet is on the brink of ecological collapse, Pan will have to decide, continue whispering at the edges of the world, or scream so loudly that the whole earth remembers it still breathes. Chapter 10, The Savage Who Never Surrendered. Smell the first rain after the drought, resurrected earth, clean leaves, a promise of life. Here, beneath the noise of the cities, the sound of an underground river that never dried up. See, in the streets of the world, millions of shod feet, and, somewhere, a single pair of bare feet touching the earth as if praying. Pan was not defeated, redeemed, or transformed into a harmless symbol. He persists. Because Pan was never just a Greek god, he was, and is, the archetype of the irreducible, the part of us that refuses the cage of pure reason, that dances in chaos, that desires without asking permission, that cries with the wind and laughs with the wolves. In the oldest traditions, in the voices of Arcadian shepherds, in the Orphic hymns murmured by springs, Pan does not govern. He inhabits. He does not command nature. He is nature, instinctive, ambiguous, alive. His cry is not a weapon, but an awakening. His flute is not entertainment, but a memory of the body. His love for syrinx is not obsession, but mourning that becomes art. And, throughout the centuries, while temples fell and names were erased, Pan survived exactly where he always lived, in the silences between two thoughts, in the shiver of hearing an ancestral melody, in the impulse to run barefoot on the grass, in the desire that cannot be put into words. Today, in times of ecological collapse, exhausted souls and forgotten bodies, the world doesn't need more order, it needs conscious wildness. It needs Pan not as an escape, but as a call to integrity. Because civilization is not the opposite of nature, it is its most complex expression, when it remembers its roots. Elisa, in Lisbon, plants a wild garden on her balcony. Damon, in Corinth, teaches his grandchildren the sound of the reed flute. Gaius, in dreams, still hears the wind among the hills of Arcadia. And, in each of them, Pan lives, not as a distant god, but as a truth that will not be silenced. Therefore, when someone says that Pan is dead, remember, gods don't die when temples fall. They die when no one feels their heart beating to the rhythm of the forest anymore. But as long as there is a single human being who, upon hearing the wind among the reeds, stops and takes a deep breath, as long as there are those who weep with joy at seeing the sunrise over an empty field, as long as there are those who dance alone, without an audience, simply out of a need for movement, Pan will be alive. And perhaps, this very night, as you close your eyes and listen to the silence, you too will feel him, not as a myth, but as the part of you that never accepted being domesticated. This story comes from Greek mythology, especially from the Arcadian traditions, the Orphic hymns, and the accounts of Plutarch, Pausanias, and the ancient lyric poets. If it touched you, comment, what ancestral lesson do you take from it?